Hey, Beyond 80% listeners. Just a quick note before we dive into this next episode. This conversation had a few audio hiccups due to internet connection issues, but the discussion was just too good not to share with you. So to get the best listening experience, we recommend using headphones. Thanks for your patience. We think you'll agree this episode is worth it.
Courage is actually taking responsibility for the world around you, understanding that your behavior will impact the collective. So it's service. It is taking a risk for other people, actively building a character within yourself that's going to make the world a better place. It's taking risk for the greater good. So what we can do, every single one of us, we cannot look at society without including every single one of us within it, because we all make up society as individuals. So how I behave, the words I speak will impact the collective. You're a guest on this planet, so act like one. Take the responsibility for it and see what you can do. You'll be amazed what you can do to create a better world.
As a mother of a son, I often find myself reflecting on how I'm raising him. With my older daughters, I've seen how culture gives girls room to move between archetypes. Whether they're tomboys, more traditionally feminine, or somewhere in between, it's all considered acceptable. But for boys, the lines feel thinner and the boxes taller. Too masculine and they risk being labeled dangerous or sexist. Too emotional and they're dismissed as weak. It's a lose-lose scenario that leaves many men feeling lost, uncertain of their place in families, communities, or the workplace. What makes this even harder is how little space there is for men to confront their shadows. Vulnerability is often mocked. Emotional depth is undervalued, and society still pushes the idea that lust and detachment are all men are wired for, instead of celebrating connection, fatherhood, or courage. That's why I wanted to have this conversation with Simon Lee, founder of the Courage Project. Simon works at the intersection of masculinity, trauma, and growth. He talks about how childhood wounds shape men, why courage is key to redefining masculinity, and how agape love and rites of passage can help build stronger, more compassionate communities. The Courage Project isn't about toughening men up. It's about empowering them to step out of victimhood, take responsibility, and live into their potential. In this episode, we'll explore the complexities of being a man in today's culture, the challenges our boys are growing up with, and how parents, partners, and communities can play a role in raising men who are not just strong, but courageous and deeply connected. I'm your host, Ryan Olekson, and this is Beyond 80%. Simon, welcome to Beyond 80%. Thrilled to have you here today.
It's an honor to be with you. Thank you very much for having me on.
Awesome. Can you tell us what your upbringing was like, and were there early moments that shaped your understanding of courage or the lack thereof it?
Well, that was the great arena of learning my childhood. I didn't see my father very much from the age of 3. He was out of my life completely from 9. Unfortunately, after that, we had an abusive stepfather. We also had the other 2 abusers in the family, all men. There was abuse that took place against my sister mainly, and I had to watch that as a young boy. So it was incredibly damaging. But it was also a necessary arena in order to unfold what I do now. I couldn't do what I do now without that learning process. I call it a masterclass in damaged men, without a doubt. So I was watching my uncle, my grandfather, and my stepfather that incredibly found themselves through this dark energy of inadequacy. It's always the same, isn't it? When you get a group of people that have the same kind of thought process, the same outlook on life, they find each other and they collect together, and it manifests that energy in a much more heightened state. And that's certainly what happened. They all fed off each other. And it was a deep experience in how damaged men can cause such turmoil and strife and trauma throughout a whole family. It was deeply unsettling at first when I came out of that environment. No one spoke about trauma in my days because I'm an older guy now, so I didn't really know what was happening to me. I had this fight or flight part of me that was inside me all the time. I only had to hear 2 people arguing, my body would instantly go into a panic mode. Even if people talking loudly, it manifested in my body. I had that trauma deeply rooted in physical tissue, how I moved, how I spoke. My whole perception of the world took place like that. I had a complete masculinity void. So without going into too much detail, to protect my sister, just me saying that probably gives you some idea of what went on. But I had experiences like my stepfather would turn my sister's heating off in her room in the winter just to make her suffer. So she'd come down the stairs to complain to my mother. And then he would pass her on the stairs and elbow her in the head. And I remember her head ricocheting off the wall. I still remember that sound. And I felt so helpless, and I didn't realize it actually made me quite ashamed because I thought I need to be getting it as bad as my sister, or actually, I'd willingly take the abuse rather than my sister. I didn't understand until later on in the process what the real problem I had with myself was, and I just couldn't do anything. And it got worse as the years went on. And eventually, my mother left and she met somebody else. And we all thought, oh, that'll be great now. We've left. But we took all that trauma with us. And that was our perception of the world individually. And then it was up to us to process it and come to terms with it and find a way forward. And that was the beginning of the journey. Who the hell am I? I'm not this boy that's got all this trauma inside of him. I'm something else. I need to find out what that is. I need to find out a way beyond this. And I know it sounds morbid, Ryan, but it got to the point where I thought, I'm either going to get over this or I'm going to die trying. And I really meant it. And people were quite perturbed by hearing that. I didn't mean it in a negative way. I just felt I was suffering so intensely that it just wasn't worth having a life like this. And at some point, because I won the Southern England bodybuilding title at 19, and I stood on stage and felt crushed because I thought, I've got this great physique and I feel so frightened still. After that, I had a massive breakdown in which the doctors told me I had leukemia, wrongly. They left me 2 weeks for that diagnosis. And it was during that 2 weeks before I got the proper diagnosis that I thought, is how I feel worth dying for? If I'm going to sacrifice myself, then I want to do it in a way that's actually going to find out what the problem is. Because I've been running from it up till then. And it reminds me of the quote that says, what you run from looks for you anyway. I love that. And it was so true because it chased me wherever I went. It just kept tapping me on the shoulder saying, all this stress and trauma you need to look at, it's still here. We're just following you around till you turn around and look.
What I think is so amazing about your story is that you are surrounded by men who sound very similar to your stepfather, maybe at different severity levels. And you had a choice to carry that cycle on and become that same man that you saw around you. For you, you were the one that stopped and said, no, I'm not going to do that. And you took all of that energy, that trauma, and you turned it into something for the positive, which is the Courage Project. So given this history that you have, where did you come up with this idea? How did you write this book? What was that breaking point for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, it happened after the breakdown. The Courage Project is a relatively new book, and I've got two others on the way now. For me, it would be so easy to just copy the men around me at the time. My uncle was my grandfather's son, and I've seen the debates online about what makes a psychopath, because he was diagnosed as a psychopath twice. I spoke to the family about this, and they told me he was given no moral boundaries. He could do no wrong. So whatever he did, whether he was cruel to animals, whether he was really cruel and violent to other children, which he was never called out for being wrong. He didn't have a hard life because there's this idea that a psychopath's built through trauma. I've never found that to be true. I found it more likely that a psychopath is born by giving absolutely no moral boundaries at all. He can do whatever he wants. He's put on this pillar of virtue, even when he's performing very cruel actions. So I looked at that and I thought, that can't be right. So I instinctively went to the gym and I found male mentors. That was really important for me. I need to find different guys. So that was the massive turning point. And I went to Spit and Sawdust weight training gym. It was all full of bouncers, bodyguards, and they took me under their wing. They introduced me to guys that actually protected women, that looked out for children, including me. I was very young when I went there. I started training at 15. And I started to observe the difference between tough guys that were out there to protect people, to make society better, and the ones that were weak because they couldn't find the capacity to be courageous, decided to be cruel. And that was the beginning of the journey. And that led on to me taking so many notes about how does food affect the mind? How does exercise affect the mind? Looking at the ancient philosophy, I found a great mentor early on, Peter Hudson, who was the coach of many of the big rock stars at one times. And he took me on. I remember going on about my childhood and woe betide me and I'm a victim. And he looked at me one day and he said, stop complaining. You are sitting on a cauldron of potential and all you're doing is whining. You've got a massive gift there. That darkness will give you immense light, but you won't access it if you complain. But I was really angry with him, Ryan, because I knew he was right. I was using that story not to live, not to aspire to greater things, not to go after my dreams. I was using that as a handicap, and he pointed it out.
This is interesting because I feel like in the culture that we live in, we throw around these words constantly around trauma and the narrative, and everyone is self-diagnosing. And you pull out a really key point that While I think that's so great to have awareness of it, to understand what we learned from it, is that going to be your story forever? Or are you going to make a new story because of that? And what's so unique, Simon, about your story is that it almost was a rite of passage to be able to do the work that you're doing. You are so uniquely positioned to do this type of work with young men because of what you went through. And if you had never gone through that, could you have done this type of work?
No, and I speak about this a lot. It's a bit like if somebody wants to run a marathon and they go to somebody that's got the right paperwork and say, well, I can show you how to run a marathon, but I've never done it myself. Or you could go to the one that's actually run a marathon, knows what it feels like, know when it's going to get really painful, has done it many times. You want to go with the one with the experience. And with this, it's even more important because you just can't do it unless you've been broken, unless you've been to that dark side. And it's so enticing. In the UK, it's all about victimhood. It's all about celebrating being a victim. And it's so enticing to do that because you can almost hide away, but you won't have any life. It's not what you're here to do. We are here to overcome, to take our scars and create something beautiful with them. And we all have the capacity to do that. So it's such a disservice to stay in victimhood because it's not always about how to overcome it. Sometimes it's an identity that people can not be harsh on me. I can get away without doing things. There's a leverage in victimhood. We think there is, but it just doesn't give you a life. It's not why we're here. But there is an enticement at the moment to be that way. I did it myself as a young man. I used it. I was frightened, and I used that story to avoid. It was avoidance, and it was very effective.
Yeah, and I think we're all guilty of it at some point. I can think of a time where I've used it myself. And I do think it's necessary to be in that space for a while and feel it and get familiar with it. But at some point, you have to make the decision that I'm ready to alchemize these feelings into something with purpose or something more positive to give back, and make sure that those moments in my life are used as a catalyst to do something big in this world and help others. I love your thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's a delicate line, isn't it? I had a young man, he really wanted to hang on to that story and he was using it to stay off work. I could tell this young man was hiding. He didn't want to come out of it. He fought me every twist and turn until we eventually lead him into a corner. We revealed what he gets out of it, which is a really difficult thing to do, what he was avoiding and why. And once you do that, it's very hard not to do something because you've laid it out on the table. But it is a delicate line. You're right.
Yeah, one question that gets to the core of it sometimes, how does this serve you? How is the story serving you? And I do see that some of those buttons click for people. Sometimes it just takes a couple questions to get there. But when we talk about the Courage Project and your different programs for men, you frame them as a moral obligation, which is very different from this thought of just another self-help book or a self-help program. Can you talk about how this is different and why you believe that it is a moral obligation for men?
I want to reframe the whole thing. I've looked at self-help and the personal development industry, and without being overly critical, there's this self-obsession, this self-interest. What I'm asking is to go back to responsibility and say, actually, it's not about you. It's about your service to the world, what it is to be a man, what your duty is. What we're looking at is how you're going to impact the world around you. What impact are you going to make that's going to serve mankind? It's very much the love of mankind rather than just about what can I get out of stuff. And I see that even in personal development, where the first stage is, I'll put a big car and a big house on a vision board. And I always say to guys, that's way down the line. First, I want you to decide what sort of man you're going to be, what character are you going to be. It's kind of like an ancient idea of what it is to be a man. And I think that man is far more likely to achieve his ambitions and dreams, whilst also impacting society as a force for good. It's very refreshing and guys are responding to it. And I think that if they can just get out of that self-interest, they'd be surprised. If you've got to live from a greater courage, you're far more likely to become that man you want to be. But you're not going to do it just by going after what you want because you're frightened.
I want to kind of bring us back to the origins of this. In your book, you talk about society decaying because of the cowardice of men. And I was hoping that you could break that down. And you believe that men lost their courage to be men in society.
At some point, men avoided their responsibility. It was all about self-interest. They looked on comfort as security within themselves. We've got a pyramid on our website. And at the bottom of that pyramid, we've got compassion, courage, and integrity that all men should live from. That's our primary aim. But in the middle of the pyramid, we've got fear and suffering, which is unavoidable. We're all going to suffer at some point. We're all going to be frightened. But we'll either use that suffering and fear to have greater love, greater courage, and greater integrity, or we go to the top of the pyramid, which is obedience and conformity. So it can break us down to the point where we become more selfish, or we can use that fear and suffering to actually become more courageous. And the way society is set up, men are choosing obedience and conformity, which is the road to cowardice, because it's all about self-interest. Am I okay? They might extend it to their families, but often they don't. It's all about their own self-interest. So we've got a society set up, especially in the UK at the moment. We're encouraging people to be quiet, to accept terrible things going on, not to complain about them, and to be obedient, to conform. And it's heartbreaking to see because it's the road to ruin. It's how society will just destroy itself and degrade itself. There's a moral degradation going on, which is why I covered it in the book, about how we can heal it, how we can repair it by going to that bottom of the pyramid and actually aiming at that. Or we're going to use it to conform and be obedient. And it's about, I'm going to avoid that to protect myself. And, Albert Einstein said a long time ago that it's an illusion to only care about your own family and look at other people's awful things and think, well, at least it's not my family. We should not think like that. As a society, we must feel other people's pain. We must see the injustice of the world, otherwise we just won't act upon it and we'll just become numb to it and cut ourselves off from it.
I would love to explain how we're defining courage. When I think of courage, I think of someone who is beating their chest and they're a warrior and they have a weapon, and that kind of leads to this vision of violence. But I think, Simon, that you define courage in a very different way. Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Yeah, the word courage comes from the Latin word cor, which is heartfelt. And courage is to feel what's going on, to feel the injustice of the world and act accordingly. Courage is actually taking responsibility for the world around you, understanding that your behavior will actually impact the collective. So it's service. It is taking a risk for other people, actively building a character within yourself that's going to make the world a better place. It's taking risk for the greater good. So I think people get individual bravery with courage mixed up. You get warriors that go and sacrifice their life to free people, whatever that may be. You'll get firefighter that'll go into a burning building. That's courage. He's taking a risk for other people. That's an extreme example. So what we can do, every single one of us, we can go, okay, we cannot look at society without including every single one of us within it, because we all make up society as individuals. So how I behave, the words I speak will impact the collective. You're a guest on this planet, so act like one. Take the responsibility for it and see what you can do. You'll be amazed what you can do to create a better world.
When we go back to that pyramid and we talk about the obedience and the silence, you're describing that if people don't speak up and just comply with what they're being told, it will lead to more violence. Whereas courage, someone standing up, speaking out against it, putting other people in front of them will actually lead to peace.
Absolutely. A lot of people have written about love being the most amazing human value. And I looked at this years ago and I thought, okay, I get that, but it's not romantic love. So what is the action from love? What creates a better world of love? And what I realized was it was courage and integrity, because courage is taking responsibility for the world. You can't get more loving than that. And integrity is the focus on truth, honesty, telling the truth. So in my early seminars, I had guys standing up. I'd speak about this a lot and I'd say, it's all about love. And they'd go, what are you talking about, Simon? We come here for warriorship, not love. But once they understood about courage, once they understood about integrity, as the actions of love, we can get our heads on. That's actually quite exciting. It was about understanding the action behind that as men and as women. And that made it more understandable, because I didn't understand it either. Everybody kept saying to me, it's all about love. And I was thinking, what does that even mean? It's all about love. I feel it to my sister and my mother and my children and my other half, feel that love. But how can you live a life like that if you want to go out there and achieve things? Where does that fit in? Once I understood the courage and integrity pathway, I thought, okay, I get it now.
So one of the things I find so interesting is how we got here, these big cultural shifts that have happened. I would say I've noticed in the last 5 to 6 years. I'm sure it's been happening much longer than that. But at least in the US, this contradiction that to lift one group up in our society, we have to put one group down. And I think men are the victims of that through the media, different ideas and culture. And we see this contradiction of a man who speaks out or stands up for people, it's automatically tied to this idea that he's violent or dangerous or he's going to do something to hurt someone else. But then we promote this other side of it where we're obedient. Men are not allowed to have feelings. If they have too many feelings, they're weak. So I see this very fine line that men have to walk in society where they can't be too alpha, but they can't be too weak. And I'm curious from your point of view, Simon, what's happening here? Because it is a huge shift specifically around men.
Yes, you're right. It did start long before that. I always look at the sitcom Friends, which is quite old now. But you look at the guys in there, Joey, Ross, and Chandler. They were very funny, but they were like helpless men, over emotional, couldn't get a girlfriend, and very weak. So it started a long time ago. I noticed it in Hollywood. I still do. There was this kind of emasculation of men. I absolutely do think it's deliberate. I think that society, for whatever reason, wanted weaker men. If you weaken men, you weaken the whole society. Lots of people have said that. My most common question the men ask me is, what is toxic masculinity? That's my most asked question from men. And do they come under that? To me, it is reminiscent of the times we live in. So I saw in TV series 1883, there's a line in there, and I wrote it down so I remember, and it said there's a weak men will rather guilt the strong than become strong themselves. And I think that's where we're at. So men that aren't capable are weak. They look at strong men and get involved. Because people say to me, I bet women attack you quite a lot. I say, no, not as much as the men. It's the men that attack me online because they don't want to have strong messages anymore. So yes, I think men are in a massive crisis. It's had a knock-on effect into society, into fatherhood, into how women now view themselves. And it's a massive issue. But I do think it was deliberate, and I don't blame women either. That's a popular one that's going on. It's women's fault. No, it's not. You're a man. You have to take the responsibility yourself. If you decided to heed those messages, it's down to you. A tough one to swallow. It's created a catastrophe in modern society. You wouldn't believe how many young men are coming to me at the moment with all kinds of issues because what they're told at school about themselves and who they should look up to, who they should blame in the world, and who are the heroes. And the mums, normally single mums, bring their sons to me because they want a different perspective, because they know it's harming them. People say to me, aren't you worried with that message? But it's not about worry. It's just about something that's got to be done. Because I believe that as men, we can create the healing of the world. If we stop being so suppressed, we can heal the world. Women will be better off. Children will be better off. It's one of the most important topics of our time, I believe.
And I think you hit the nail on the head at the core of what I'm trying to get to as well, is what boys are told from a very young age about how they should feel about themselves being a man. And from a woman's perspective, the one thing that I notice is when we talk about feminism, it never seems it's the uplifting of women as being powerful and creative and tapping into that divine light that they have. But there's always that secondary message of more men need to open doors for women. And it feels like it goes into this blaming victimhood type of space, similar to what you're saying that men are also feeling when they look at women. I feel the message that we're giving to young boys is that they're not allowed to be proud to be a man, and they can't really step into some of these concepts that you're talking about because it's a lose-lose.
Yes.
We just can't lift up one group without putting down another. We always have to point fingers and blame someone else. I feel bad for young boys. I feel bad for men because I do feel like they're put in a box right now that is very hard to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what you're talking about there is that being made to feel almost ashamed to be male. And that's what a lot of school boys have said to me. I'm talking about the weaponizing of guilt and shame here, which is a potent weapon. Politicians use it, families use it. They want to keep somebody in their box and press them down. And some of the kids have had the police come into school and they've said, you are inherently dangerous because you're male. So they have lectures on that. And they have lessons on toxic masculinity. What they don't do, Ryan, is they don't give them any empowering messages. So it's all about shame. It's all about guilt. They don't come in and say, by the way, as boys, you've got this massive potential. This is your responsibility as men in the world. Isn't this exciting? It's always negative. So they come to me when I'm teaching them this, your place in the world, your responsibility, this create a rite of passage, be strong, be fit, respect women and look after the children. And we've got a Bushido poster we give away to the boys. It's got the 7 virtues on there. And not one lad has never wanted one of those posters. They all take their poster home, they put it on the wall. Even some of the CEOs I coach, they read it every day and every night before they go to bed, just to install in them the men they want to be. I first learned it with the Bushido Code from Peter Hudson. And I must admit, Ryan, when I first found that and he taught me that, I thought, this is what I wanted in my life. It was that powerful for me to look at that code and say, wow, this is the holy grail, what I've been looking for. This is it. It gave me a direction of the man I wanted to be on courage, virtue, and responsibility, and duty, and integrity. And it was all on this code as a man.
If I remember correctly, the code is something that all humans, whether male, female, or if they identify another way, could absolutely take into their life and be better for it. Can you talk a little bit about some of the concepts of the code, just so listeners have an idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one is a duty to your family. If you're a younger man, you look out for your sister, you look out for your brother, you look out for your parents, you make the household a better place by your part within it. There's also the duty of courage. So you've got a duty, as they say, not hide like a turtle in a shell and actually step out in the world and make it a better place. There's treating your enemies with courtesy because it's a reflection of you, not having outbursts of hatred and anger because you're only concerned about how you behave. But it's very much about duty, protection, respect, and training your body as well. I had an 18-year-old the other day and he was already an alcoholic at 18. He never done any fitness in his life. He came to me quite a wreck. He's also on quite hard drugs. We went through this code over a period of time. And he said to me at the end, no one's ever told me my responsibility as a man. You're the first person to tell me. No school told me. My parents never told me. No one ever told me what my responsibilities and duties as a man. And he said, I feel so ashamed that I didn't know that. But he took the code home and he's going to be on the pathway now to knowing what he needs to do. It's good for women too, but they're doing their own way.
Yeah, I heard about it the first time when I listened to another podcast you had done. And I thought, oh, this is so wonderful. It's really great for everyone to brush up on, especially for young men, to give them something to look at as an example, not necessarily telling them a role to take on. But I think in today's society, as we've discussed how confusing it is, and there's all these contradictions and hypocrisies out there, the code is a really great starting point. And speaking of love, I know one of the things that you're very passionate about is this concept of agape love. What is agape love, and what does it look like for a man to live from agape?
Yeah, that's a great question. Agape love. I came across that a while ago through reading about Martin Luther King, and it's the ancient Greek term. It was about man is going to live his highest values, his highest self, his highest loving self. And his responsibility is to hold man accountable to that highest level he can. And each man to hold himself accountable to that loving warrior, full of courage and integrity. So it's a lifting love, lifting the world to its highest possibilities, to its highest values. It is the love of mankind. And through that love, you hold other men accountable. Say, come on, you can be more. It's not hateful. It's not judging and condemning. It's you can be more. It's that love for mankind, that men and women, the capability to hold each other to a higher level through their own example. And that is what at the core agape love is. It's a lifting, raising quality, an expansive quality of love all around us, where we can encourage people to be more. But it's not easy.
So would you say that's how men connect to that agape love? They hold themselves in the higher standard of how they see themselves, as well as holding other men to that high standard?
Yes, it's got to start with you. You can't go out there and demand change when you've got the same issues. You've got some dark habits going on behind the scenes, behind drawn curtains. You've got to have an idea. Because most men I speak to, right, I say, what do you stand for? What's your code? They go, I don't know what I stand for. I haven't got a code. Not even thought about it. They've just gone after what they want and wonder why it's created an immense amount of suffering. So the code and knowing what you stand for as a man is extremely important. In fact, without that foundation, you're going to come into some pain and suffering needlessly because you haven't gone through those basics first, which is why in ancient society they had really meaningful rites of passage where the boy became a man and his responsibility to look after the tribe. The first thing he had to do was make sure the elderly people and the women and children of that tribe were fed first and foremost. Things like that huge rite of passage, and they know what they stand for. They know what their duty and responsibility is. That's all gone. And it's a shame because society will be so much different.
You bring up an interesting point about this idea of rite of passage. How do you think that has affected men overall and their roles and responsibilities within their communities and within their families?
Hugely. I mean, we've got statistics in the UK, which Andy Cook wrote in the Social Justice Report, of men 23 or 24 hitting the most intense bouts of depression and mental health issues. They've gone out into the world as men and realised that they haven't got any standard to follow, no understandable standard of masculinity, and it just crushes them and they hit rock bottom. Fathers don't mentor their children anymore. It's left up to the school, left up to the government. Everything's passed on for somebody else to do. And I think that's the main core problem. I've got to actually back women up here. They're still doing what mums always do. They're nurturing their children, looking out for them, they make sure they provide for them. The fathers have stepped down. I can't speak for the USA, but a social justice report recently written by Andy Cook in the UK about 3/4 of a certain age group of British prisons didn't have a father figure or a male mentor, have severe bouts of depression. When I read it, I thought, wow, it's worse than what I thought. The suicides, everything. And they're all coming from the masculinity void, the fatherless society. It's a massive catastrophe. And it's affecting children, it's affecting women, it's affecting our entire societies. And it's really serious. And, I make sure that I put the basics in place. We always eat around the dinner table, always. With no TV dinners on our lap, we sit around the dinner table as a family, and I ask the boys, what did you learn today? They're only 10 and 9. I train them almost every day. I talk philosophy to them. It's my responsibility. I decided to have children, so raise them, mentor them. The opposite of not doing that can be disastrous. You can have catastrophic consequences for not doing that. It's your duty as a father to mentor your children and also bring in other mentors for subjects you don't know about, because this is the building blocks. You build the foundation of courage, integrity, values. It will serve them for life. And I'm extremely concerned about what's going on in the UK with men just stepping down, stepping away, not even seeing their children. A lot of people say to me, I bet these fathers are like on the poverty line, aren't they? I can tell you now, Ryan, these men are top-level bankers in London, and they're very wealthy. They're hooked on drugs, cocaine. They don't treat their children very well. They hardly ever see them. They're having multiple affairs. So they're not on the poverty line. It's men with money, mostly.
That's such a good point. And I think we see that in the US too, these absent fathers. When you hear that word, you think they are on the poverty line in low socioeconomic areas. But just because you hear the word absent doesn't mean they are physically absent. They're physically there, but to your point, they may be out having affairs, doing drugs, or working. That's another addiction that we don't really look at as the same type of addiction as a drug addiction, but it is an addiction where they're never home. And again, there's many women raising their children alone. And it kind of leads me into my next question about the way modern comforts are set up now in society and these distractions that we have. How are the various distractions, and what do you think they are, that are weakening men from the inside out?
I think we've normalised these distractions, the subduing of men. I've spoken to wives and they said, I thought that was normal. One of them is porn. I would say porn gives a man a warped idea of who he is by normalising that, by doing stuff behind closed curtains. If you don't feel guilty or ashamed, why are you pulling the curtains? Why do you wait till your wife's out and children out before you do it? It's like, reminds me of the old samurai maxim that says, judge a man on what he does behind closed doors, not what he's like outside. And I think that's so true. I spoke to many wives who say that their husbands watch porn all the time, and they just say to me, I thought all men did it. And I said, forget that. I said, how does it make you feel knowing that he's doing that? And that's where you get to the core of it. But for men, that dissipates their energy. How can you aim at a man of love, courage, and integrity to the highest possibilities you've got if you're looking at porn and those graphic images on the screen? That dissipates your energy. And I think there's this idea that men think, if I do that behind closed doors, no one's going to know. I'll go to work, I can be with my wife, and they never know. And I think that's the big myth of life. Life is a tapestry of one, and what you do somehow infiltrates into the rest of it, whether you're aware of it or not. So I think porn, which certainly does give a false image of women, but it actually gives a false image of the man himself, which he's indulgent by doing that. It dissipates his energy. You can't focus on that character of honor you want to be, and that maybe that ambition you have, that service to the world. If you're doing things like that, you're kidding yourself. It's a tough one. I've been there when I was a young man. I was unlucky in love because I was too frightened to have a proper relationship. I was led to porn. I was led to that. I think it was shame, not feeling enough. And it's not till men stop doing it, they realise how much it was holding them back. And I think that's one of the major things that men don't understand. I've seen the data and the figures of OnlyFans in the USA. and the UK. Millions and millions, and a lot of them are married. It's a massive thing. And they think it's harmless. It's not. And that's the thing about using the terminology escape rather than going without. You're escaping something that's holding you back.
This conversation, I'm sure people who know me are going to roll their eyes right now because I get very passionate about this particular topic. We normalize this as a society that men watch porn. I think everyone can agree to that it's very normal. You start when you're 13. And I think boys, even when they turn a certain age, think that they're supposed to do that they should want to do that. And I think there's this bigger umbrella that we have this thought in our head that men are wired for lust. We love to fall back on the biology of animals when we talk about men. They're lustful. They have to have all this sex. They think about sex every, I think I heard 6 seconds. And when I really started to dig into it and think about it, I know you're talking about this concept of escape. There's a reason that men watch porn behind closed doors and wait for their wives to go to sleep and don't talk about it in front of their families because of that shame and guilt. And this narrative that men are wired for lust is basically a permission slip for them to be disconnected as husbands, as fathers to other men. And porn is just one example of that. But this thought that married men are unhappy, so that's why they watch porn, and a married man can't have a great sex life because it comes down to the act itself. But what I see is this permission slip to disconnect. And I think porn propels that narrative. And it reinforces that thought that men cannot be emotionally connected and that the only connection they have is physical, which I think that is the biggest crock of bullshit that we believe as a society. And we humans are much more than animals. We have this divine design within us. I get so agitated when I hear this narrative about porn and it's normal. And I think it's one of the most destructive things that we have in this society.
I totally agree. And that's a great comment about the normalization of it and the disconnection. Men that go to porn are already disconnected, not from their wives, from themselves. And this is true of drugs, alcohol, anything. There's already a disconnect there from your own masculinity, from your own manhood. If you don't master your senses, you're never going to achieve great things. So you've got to master what you consume, what you watch, the material you're feeding within yourself. If you don't do that, you're never going to become the man you're capable of being, the husband you could be. Because if you're not gaining control over your senses, they're just going to master you, dictate your life on every single level. And this idea of fasting, the Western people have taken that as to being food only, but originally fasting meant paying attention to the words you speak, what you're consuming, what you're watching. That's what it originally meant. It wasn't just about food. It's not until you stop doing something you realise just how much of a hold it had over you. What you're saying about men thinking about sex all the time and they got this animal lust, you're right. Is that what men are? Because I've heard that, Ryan, so often about men saying, men and women are different and men need more sex. And I just say, just making excuses for yourself. And most of them haven't even spoken and communicated with their wives about their needs because they're too frightened. A lot of that is a lack of communication and they won't even approach the subject. Why not have an honest conversation with your wife and talk about it? A lot of it's fear. I better not say anything because I haven't got the courage to. So I'll just go and watch some porn.
Exactly. I love that you brought this up. As a therapist in training, one of the things that I hear with clients is the complaints about the sex life. And I know right off the bat, it never has anything to do with sex. I would say 95% of the time, it comes down to communication. The wife and the husband are not courageous enough to share with each other what their needs are and what they expect. And the other funny thing is 9 times out of 10, it's the same thing. They want the same thing. They just can't say it to each other.
Yeah, it's so true.
So I do have a lot of women who listen to my podcast, and I want to ask a couple of questions from that side of the house. After everything we've touched on and talked about, how can women support the rise of courageous men without dimming their own power?
Yeah, that's a great question. Allow men to open the door again. A guy said to me the other day, and this is really relevant, he said, as a young guy, he said, but what about if I date a girl and I open the car door for her and she doesn't like it because she doesn't want that anymore? I say, do it anyway. If that's how you want to perform, you'll find the right woman will lean into that and actually like it. So you must do it anyway. Be a man, look after her, treat her with respect. I always say to guys, you all want queens, but you won't act like kings. Be a king in order to attract a queen. So I think women have got to the point now where they're so disappointed in men, and I get that. But let them walk on the outside of the road so that you're inside. Let them open the door for you. Let them do things with the old acts of chivalry that have been lost. If you just allow him a little bit of space, it'll make him more confident actually in who he is as a man, and it'll actually enrich the relationship. Because as soon as you knock an act of chivalry, you're going to put a big crack in the whole relationship because there's going to be uncertainty all round. But allow that space, and you'll be surprised at what a beautiful relationship it turns out to be.
And what about when it comes to emotional vulnerability? This is something that has been talked for decades about men sharing emotions and being seen as weak. The men in your program, how do you talk to them about being vulnerable and rewrite some of that programming they may have?
Yeah, that's a really big question. I still come up against this now with guys that just won't do this, especially young men. One thing women have said is that they want their man to be more vulnerable, but if they see him upset, I think that makes me a little bit more vulnerable now as well, because I'm seeing my masculine man upset. How does that make me feel? I think you have to accept it as something in the moment. It's no definition of the man's character. It's just something that has to come out in that moment. If it's a vulnerability to the point where it's disabling, incapacitates him, then that's different. But in the moment, to allow that vulnerability, and the relationship will get even stronger. But in order for a man to be vulnerable, he has to have strength first. One thing that therapy needs to understand is when I started out, I was talking to guys about being vulnerable, but actually, if I created strength in them first, let them know their responsibility, they were far more likely to be vulnerable. Without a code, without any masculinity, there's no way they're going to be vulnerable because they don't know who they are or what they stand for. So it's a non-judgment allowing, and it's no definition of that man's character in the moment. I had a CEO the other day come to me and he said that I'm worried about my masculinity. So I cry at sad movies and it can be a bit embarrassing. I've got a couple of daughters and I'm quite an emotional guy. I said, you run a massive company with loads of people under you. Don't worry about it. You can take action despite your emotional content. It doesn't matter. And he was like, yeah, I'm doing pretty good actually. So he just needed a bit of confirmation it was okay to be emotional, but it doesn't disable him, it doesn't incapacitate him. He can still take action, do great things.
You said something interesting. When it comes to masculinity, you're saying you can still take action. Do you attach action to masculinity?
Yes, I do, if it's through courage and integrity. That is the main action part of a man. He's the protector, and that courage and integrity is speaking the truth, being of service, especially to his family. So yeah, absolutely. That's the action that has to come from love.
So one thing we haven't really touched on is the programs in which you work with men. Give us an idea when someone walks through your door or signs up for one of your programs online, what can they expect?
Well, one of the big things we were on, we got the Kingmakers program, which is on our 7 courages, which is the pillars of values that men need. They're going to get feedback from themselves about their fears, and everything's going to come up. The weaknesses you've got, all the prejudices and belief systems will come out kicking and screaming. And we've got a framework of food, thought, and movement. We insist that men master what they consume, how they move, training their body, a thought program based on courage. And on top of that, we got things like responsibility as a man and values we've spoken about. He's got to master his senses. And, what we spoke about earlier, one of the things that comes out time and time again is the porn, smoking weed, drinking too much, womanizing. Once they get into the program, they can be very honest. We talk about these things openly, not normalizing them about why they do it and what it means to them. What's the shame behind that? What's the belief system there? What are you getting out of that? What are you hiding from? And we have great, interesting questions on that as we go through the program.
What are you finding are the most common patterns that you hear throughout your program?
Self-rejection. Men have learned to not accept themselves as they are. They're not enough. And not accepting oneself is the main thing that comes up time and time again. And that leads them into all kinds of addictions and problems and strifes in life.
That is really sad. I go back to all the things that we've talked about, how it's reinforced in society. It's a really tough cycle. It almost feels impossible to exit.
Yes, it's a lot of work. The older they get, the more deep-rooted it becomes. By the time some of the guys get in touch with us, they can be literally suicidal. And I get emergency calls sometimes from a guy. He just wants to hear one word from me, one sentence for a reason not to do it. I just have to say something, anything. You always question, have I said enough? Have I done enough for this man not to take his life tomorrow? That's where it gets to. So that hatred that builds from childhood of not being enough, I felt it immensely. It's immense power when I was young. As it goes on year after year, eventually that voice that says you're not enough says you shouldn't be here. So the younger we can get these guys to turn that around, to say, actually, you are everything you need to be, everything you want, you have now. It's just covered up with the burden of conditioning, societal messages, the messages all around you. That's empowering.
That's what I love about the work that you do, Simon. I think this outline and platform is so positive and is so needed in the world. And along those lines, if every man listening actually embodied the message of the Courage Project and the things that we're talking about here today, what do you think the world would look like in 5 years?
I think things would be extremely different. I'd go right out on a limb here and say all these people we have, the world leaders in the world, the corruption, the tyrants, the people, that'll all be gone because they are a reflection of the men in society. And that's why I wrote the Courage Project. I said, don't look on these people that just come out of nowhere. They come from the people. We all did the work of the Courage Project and understand our responsibility to create a beautiful world, the world will be completely transformed. And we don't need everybody to do that. We only need a small percentage because the power of that always has a knock-on effect to the rest. So yeah, we could create a wonderful society.
What's the first courageous act someone could take today after we end this conversation?
The first courageous act is to be honest about how you live your life, unfiltered. Write it down. Write down what you're really hiding from. What lies do you tell? What do you do when no one's around? How do you behave when there's no eyes watching? That takes courage because you're actually got to be honest with yourself. Say, what habits have I got? And especially if you're a parent and you're listening, what am I passing on to my children that I'm maybe not even aware of? That's not an easy thing to do, but it takes great courage and great awareness and observation. Do it from a non-judgmental point of view. Do it from a point of view where you really want to do it for the goodness of the world and society.
You said one thing that reminded me of a quote, especially as it comes to a parent. The things that you don't address in yourself are the things that you are giving to your child to address as an adult.
That's brilliant. Our children, they just reflect our own habits back at us and call us out.
Yeah. Simon, I can't thank you enough. This conversation was so interesting. I'm glad you had it with me as a female. I think it's important for both men and women to hear this and to have the discussion openly about it. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Honor to be on. Thank you very much for having me.
To learn more about Simon, his mission, or the Courage Project, visit the links in the show notes below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode and further topics we can explore on this podcast together. So leave a comment below or reach out via email at beyond80%@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss an opportunity to think, question, and evolve. I'm your host, Ryan Olekson, and this is Beyond 80%.